Now we're on Daf Ayin Dalid Amid Beis. And the Gemara adds that as a result of the fact that we structure the roasting process in a way that the Beis HaShchita is pointed downwards, therefore Medav Daive. The Gemara says that the dam inside the lamb will, we call it in the Hebrew nozel, it flows through that opening where the shechita took place, and there never was actually a blia, an absorption of the dam of the kra'ayim or the pnei ayim into the lamb itself, because immediately any dam that comes out goes through this opening called the Beis HaShechita. Name a Messiah. Okay, we couldn't prove the principle of Rabbah of Kibolo Tachpolta from our Mishnah here in Pesachim about Slias HaPesach, but we'll quote now a Mishnah in Masechta Chulin as proof to the principle of Kibolo Tachpolta. Halev, the heart of the animal after shechita is completely absorbed with dam. How do you get rid of the dam? So that before you roast the lave, koro, you cut it in both directions, which is called shasi and orev, umotzi es damo. And through this process of chatich, of chituch, shasi v'orev, you will be able to remove all the dam that gathered together as a result of the shechita. But what happens if he roasted the lave without doing this kriya process? Lo kro, the Mishnah says, koro liachar bishulo. Bishulo here means tzli. After you roasted it, you can cut it. Umutter, and you can eat it. That's the Mishnah. So the Gemara asks my timer. How could you be matir eating the lave in a case where you didn't cut it? After all, at the point of tzli, when he roasts the lave, the dam that is saturated in the lave is going to be nivla, it's going to be absorbed in the lave. So what good is it if he cuts it afterwards? That slicing process is not going to remove the dam when the dam is already bolua. The answer must be, lav shouldn't it be mishum de'amridim kebolo kachpolto. That just like the dam at the moment of tzli became bolua, it was absorbed into the meat of the lave, so too, as the tzli process continues, it will draw the dam out. So the dam goes in and the dam goes out. And this would be a proof to Rabbi's principle of Kibbola Kachpolta. Gemara rejects this. Shiny lave, the lave has a special din of any organ in the body in terms of malicha and dam and tzli. All the normal rules that apply to every other organ in the body do not apply to the lave because shia. Shia means something special about the muscle tissue of the lave in such a way that it's very smooth and it does not absorb the dam. For that matter, you could take the lave and you could cook it without malicha. Again, l'chatchila we say koro, but if he did it with the eved, you can eat the lave because a lave is not bolei adam, it's shia, special category of a lave. Now the Gemara is going to quote a story about Rav to prove that Rav accepted the principle of Kibolo Kachpolto. V'Ravin Saba, the elderly Ravin, Tafle. Now that's a very important word here in the sugi that we're about to learn. Tafle means in Hebrew ituf. Ituf means when you take meat and you dip it in, let's say, breadcrumbs or something along that line. So tafle means you wrap it around. Atifa. And Ahu Bar Gosla, they took a young pigeon and they wrapped it around with these breadcrumbs or flour, and they roasted it. They did not do malicha, and they gave it to Rav. So Rav says, do me a favor, taste it first, and then if it tastes good, I'll eat it. He says that. Imale tafle, if the the taste of the flour together with the meat, meaning it enhances the taste of the meat, avli v'echel, give it to me and I'll eat it. You be my tester. Now, what's going on over here? Because the flour is now going to absorb the dam of this pigeon, of this meat. And the answer must be kabolo kachpolto, that as he's roasting it, any dam that went from the meat into the flour now goes from the flour out into the ash. It's burnt up. So it seems that Rav accepted Rav's principle of kabolo kachpolto. The Gemara rejects no proof. Ahi bismida de mafrir. Okay, now smida is a kind of refined flour. It's not very, very refined, but it's not coarse, and it's mafrir. So smida describes this soles, the breadcrumbs that we spoke about, but it's really a flour. And mafrir is called in modern Hebrew misporeres, which means it crumbles. So it's coarse, but not so coarse. And therefore, the dam will be removed by the tzliya process. So again, if you have regular classic flour, then it would not be polate the dam that it absorbs through this process of roasting. But in this case, where you have a kind of a flour that's solus, that's been refined, in such a case, it creates a propensity or the density of the flour is such that it crumbles, and therefore the dam will just simply go out. However, the Gemara now quotes Rava, and Rava apparently rejects this principle of Rabbah of Kibola Kakpolta, of Rava Ikla Lebereish Galusa, when he came to the house of the Rosh Hagola, Taflu, again, that same word Taflu that I mentioned before. They breaded Le Bar Avoza is a duck, and they breaded it in this flour, and there was no malicha, and then they roasted it. Omar, Rava says the following. Now, let me say by introduction, Rava says, I really will not eat this, except I will eat it. But I will eat it because I checked out carefully what the flour looks like. So again, what I'm trying to point out to you, so that you get your head wrapped around this Gemara, is that Rava is going to point out that there's an exception in this case. That's what we have to know. But the Gemara is going to understand that if not for the following exception, because Rava did a certain experiment and he investigated this, otherwise, as a general rule, he would not have eaten it because he didn't have kibola kopakpolto. And if the breading absorbed the dam because there was no malicha, then we have to assume the dam is still absorbed and it won't come out. But this is an exceptional case. Why? Elav, if not for the fact that chazise. Chazise means I checked it out. And what did I see? I looked at the whole mixture here with the gravy of the meat and so forth, so the duck meat. And what I found is the zogig kizuza chivra. Now, the word zig is the same as zchuchit. When you want to give an example of something that's clear, you give an example from glass. Glass is considered, if it's good glass, it's clear. So he says he looked at this mixture here with the basar and the flour and the gravy and all else thing, and he saw that it was clear. meaning there was no redness to it. Lo achli mine. If not for this, that I was absolutely convinced that there was no absorption of blood because it was clear as a piece of glass, I would have eaten it. So the Gemara says, if Rava accepted the principle of Rab of Kibol Tapolto, my area, why did Rav have to say that he only ate it because kizig, because it was so clear and it was like white glass, and there was no redness to it, no dam, is afilu kilo zig. Nami. He would have been allowed to eat it, even if it didn't look like it was clear and white and there was no redness to it. And he would have applied the principle of kibolo kachpolto. Either some redness to it. Okay, that redness is something else. It's a different kind of a gravy substance, but it's not real dam. So the Gemara says, Chasam, in that story of Rava, you can't really derive any conclusions because Bichivarta is shari. It was a different kind of flour. Now, until now, we spoke about regular flour, which has a propensity to absorb. We spoke about a special flour that is refined and is crumbly. Now we're going to talk about a third category of flour, and that's called chivarta. Chivarta means it's absolutely clean flour. It's not refined, it's just clean flour. That's the nature of the flour. And it's firm. Shara. Shara means it's firm, it's kosher. And it's not pole down. So that in this case, unfortunately, it absorbs the dam, but it doesn't readily discharge the dam, if we can use that word. So again, it's not as fine as the crumbly flour that we said before, but this is coarse flour. And as a result, because it's coarse, therefore, it will not discharge the dam. It's coarse, it's kosher. And it's made from kemach naki, but it's not solus. So solus, we said, was crumbly. And therefore, we said that the dam goes out of crumbly flour. But here, the flour is very uncrumbly. It's very tough. And therefore, Rava would not eat from this mixture unless he was absolutely convinced when he checked out the whole mixture and he saw that it was clear as white gold, as white glass, and it was not in any way red to indicate dam. But otherwise, he would have had to assume that in this kind of a case of chivarta, the dam would have been absorbed and not spit out and not regurgitated. Hilchas. So the Gemara now sets up an overview of the sugya and gives us three different scenarios, three different categories. Category number one, smida. Smida, we said, was that very fine, refined flour that's crumbly, is bein asmik, bein lo asmik sharia. Even if there's a certain redness, you're allowed to eat the mixture because we assume beyond the shadow of a doubt that the dam went out, and any redness, as we said before, is not really dam. Number two, chivarta. That was the clean kemach of Rava, which we said absorbs, but it doesn't discharge the dam. Is izig kizuza chirta. You can only eat this mixture if you're absolutely convinced that there's no redness in the color. It's crystal clear, sharia, but elo, if not, also you're not allowed to eat it. And finally, category number three, the shar k'machim, your classic flour, which we don't know if it will be polate, if it will not be polate. It's not crumbly, but on the other hand, it's not firm. Is then we do the test of Rava, and ismik, asur, lo ismik, shar. If there's redness in the mixture, then you don't need it. Now we go back to mulyasa. Mulyasa again was meat that was not salted as being roasted inside meat that wasn't salted. Hi mulyasa. Mandi osar. According to Abaye, if you remember, he objected to Rabbah. He said, wait a minute, the outer meat is going to absorb the dam from the inner meat. Is afilu puma l'tachas. Even though the Beis Hashchita was turned upside down, and you would have thought that the dam goes out through the opening of the Beis Hashchita, no, it's us. Uman Shari, but Rabbah, who was mata because of Kabbalah Kakpoto, is afilu puma liel. It doesn't matter whether you put the Beis Hashchita, that opening, facing up or facing down. In any event, the fire of the roasting will cause the plate of the discharge of the dam. And hilcha, so we paskin mulyasa shari afilu pumalia. We paskin like Rabbah, Kabbalah Kafpoto. There's a very, very important Gemara here that we just learned in terms of its implications in Yeridea. And you don't have to be makpid that the opening of the Beis Hashchita is turned towards the bottom, towards the fire, such that the dam will go out there through that Beis Hashchita. No. The Aish of the tzli itself will do the job, and it will remove all the dam. Now the Gemara quotes 3 cases in which we have a machlokas. It's the same machlokas, just we're applying it in 3 cases, the same fundamental question or issue between Rav Acha and Ravina. Now, as a general rule, the way the Gemara structures it, all over Shas, and the Gemara quotes machlokas between Ravina and Rav Acha, and it doesn't tell you who holds what, we always know, barring these 3 exceptions that we're learning about now, that Ravina is the Mekil and Rav Acha is the Machmir. And we always pass like Ravina, Lakula against Rav Acha. Those are the rules of Psak, the way that the Shas was edited and formulated. These 3 cases, it's going to be just the opposite. Ravina is going to be the Machmir, Rav Acha is going to be the Mekil, and we're going to pass like Rav Acha Lakula. So again, in any machlok between Rav Acha and Ravina, we paskin Lakula like Ravina. In this case, in these 3 cases, we're going to paskin Lakula, but like Rav Acha. And what are the 3 cases? Number 1, Umtza, number 2, Bei, and number 3, Mizrake. And these are all different issues in roasting and in dam as to whether or not the roasting process in and of itself will be sufficient and reliable to remove the dam. Umtza is raw meat, and on the meat there are patches of blood. We would call it coagulated blood. They are the testicles of a male animal, and mizrake are the vessels inside the neck of the animal. Now, in all these 3 cases, we're looking at dam, umtza, bei, and mizrake, all dam. Pligi bei Rav Acha v'Ravina. Now the Gemara goes out on a little tangent, put it in brackets. Whenever you see a machlok between Rav Acha and Ravina, and we don't know which one is the Mekil, which is the Machmir, is Rav Acha l'chumra, Ravina l'kula, v'hilchasaka Ravina l'kula. It's always Ravina against Rav Acha, who is the Mekil, we pass like Ravina. L'bar mehani tlas, with the exception of these 3 cases, umta, bei, and mizrake, they're Rav Acha l'kula, Ravina l'chumra. It's Dafka Ravina who's the Machmir in these cases, and Rav Acha's l'kula, v'hilchasaka Rav Acha l'kula. We're going to paskin in these 3 cases like Rav Acha, but we're always paskin l'kula. So now the Gemara goes through all these 3 cases one by one. Number 1, Hay Umtza, that case of a raw piece of meat, the asmik. Asmik means we see coagulations of blood. Now, at this point, we have to add something which Rashi the Meiri emphasized here, that what's called dam nitzrar is called machmas maka. Let me explain. The Torah only prohibits dam when it's porish, when the dam comes out. However, if the animal got a maka, then the dam coagulates, but it's not dam sheporish. And therefore, our whole issue now about dam in the case of umta de sumka is only with regard to a drabanan, to dam drabanan. It's not dam chapirish. Chatre, he takes the piece of meat and he makes incisions in the piece of meat. Umalche, and then he salts it. In that case, we assume 100,000% he got rid of all the dam. He doesn't have to roast it. He can cook it. He actually implemented a classic process of malicha. And that's what the Torah does. The Torah relies on malicha, the salting process, removes the dam, go ahead and cook it and eat it. However, shafte b'shapuda, if he takes this raw meat as is, without cutting it, no slices, without salting it, he puts a spit through it and he roasts it in the oven. Shari, it's mutter. Why? Because made of diet. Because the blood will flow out. It's nozel, if you remember that word. And that's a result of the power of the H to remove the dam. Achte agumre. So we have these two cases where either he did a classic malicha or ate sli, and in both cases it's mutter. Now we have the gray area, so to speak, the twilight zone area, and that's grilling it on coals. Achte agumre. So you might underline those two words because they're going to appear in all these three cases that we're going to deal with. Achte agumre. Achte means to place it down. Gumre are coals. So we're talking about, I remember there's a place in Itanya, I think it's called Gichaliv. It's a meat place. Everything is made on coals. And again, this is going to be one of the exceptions to the rule where Ravina is the machmir and Rav Acha is the mekil. Chad osar v'chad shari. Mandi osar, according to Ravina, he says it's osar. Why? Because he put it directly on the coals. This is not sli in the classic roasting, because when you roast something, the meat is suspended over the fire. And therefore, as a result of the fact that it immediately gets heated up by the gecholim in direct contact with the coals, matzmis samis. According to Ravina, mandi osar is mitzkavetz, as we say in Hebrew, meaning, like, for example, if you remember from Masechta Shabbos, we had the word mitzamek b'yafalo. It shrivels up. And as a result of shriveling it up, the dam becomes completely balua, and we can't eat this meat. Man de shari, according to Rav Acha, who's the mekil, he holds mishav shoyt, that the fire of the gecholim are fiery hot, will pull out the dam, and so we paskin again like Rav Acha lekula and mishav shoyt. The second machlokus is ched bei, the testicles of the male animal, and they are red. Chatchinu umalchinu, number one, this is the first case that everybody agrees to. He cuts them and he salts them. Afilu k'terechari, you could cook it. Tolinu v'chapuda, if he roasts it over with a spit over an open fire, sharian, it's mutter. Why? Because made of dayev, because the fire will draw out the blood. But here's the gray area in the middle. Achtinu agumre, he placed it down on coals. Pligi be Rav Acha Ravina, chad osa chad shari. Mandi osar mitzvah samis, mandi shari mishav shoy. The one who says it's osar, he holds that what's going on here is that it is shriveling and tightening and holding on to the dam. And the other one is mandi omas mati. He says no, the power of the fire through tzli is such that it will draw forth the dam. The chen mizriki, and the third case are these vessels, these. In Hebrew, they're called vridim. How do you say if I read it in English? Those pipes that draw the blood. I have an English translation here, because I can't hear you. I mean, you may be yelling out the answer, but I'm sure Dr. David noticed how to translate the word vridim into English. Where am I? Okay. Ah, it's the old Mickey Mouse. That's why, yeah, that's why David doesn't give you the answer, because we haven't yet solved after all these months that
How about arteries?
Arteries. Excellent. Arteries. You see, I'm here in Israel too long. I don't remember the word arteries. Okay. All up in the brain. If the arteries are not pumping the blood, you start forgetting. So what happens with the arteries in the neck? They're full of blood. So then, number one, the simple case, veins. Okay. So we have a chlokis here between David and Jerry as to whether it's veins or arteries. Okay. And chatche umalche, fine. He cuts it, salts it, the blood comes out, and afilik there shari he can cook it. To get yourself cooked, veins or arteries, whichever you like. Talia b'shpuda, if he roasts them over a spit, over an open fire, is then we require beis hashkitul tatoi, that the opening of the neck, which was shechted now, should be turning towards the bottom, so all the dam goes out. Shari, then it's mutter, made of dye. If he puts it over coals, pligi bar avach ravina chad osar, v'chad shari mandi osar, mixed with sobis mandi shari, mishav shoy v'hilchasa, and we pass like Rav Acha in all these three cases, lekula mishav shoy. The fire will pull out the dam. Now the Gemara brings a machlokes between Rav Acha and Ravina about the first of the three cases, umtza the asmik. Hi, umtza the asmik. If you have a certain redness in this raw meat, and then he roasts it, alye asir lo asmik chalye shari. He took the gravy that comes out of this raw piece of meat as he cut it up. And now what's the status of the gravy? He roasted a piece of meat, raw meat, and now there's a certain gravy that comes out of it, and it's us. According to Rav Acha, it's us. Why? Because we assume it's absorbed with dam. Rashi gives two interpretations. So far, we're going according to Rashi's first interpretation, and there's a bunch of dam that is a konus, and now it comes out in the gravy. And we can see the redness of this gravy. Lo asmik, if we don't see any redness, and we roasted it, is chalye shari. Then the chalye, the gravy, is mutter. And we don't assume that there's any dam in it because it has no redness. Ravina Amar, afilu lo asmik, even if it doesn't have any redness, nami chalye osir, we still don't eat the gravy. We're not allowed to do so. Why? Efsha de lespe shuraike de dom. There's got to be some veins of blood that are there in this piece of in this gravy, mixed in the gravy, in the liquids. There are some veins with blood in them. We don't see them, but they're there. And therefore, the meat itself you're allowed to eat, but you cannot eat the gravy. That's Rashi's first shot in the sugya. Rashi offers a second shot in the sugya, and this is based on a Gemara that we'll learn right now, that maybe chalye is not the mohel, the gravy, but maybe the word chalye refers to vinegar. And vinegar is a very strong chemical substance that removes dam. Amalei Mar Barav Memar L'Ravashi Abba. So Mar tells us about his father Amemar, Megamele Gemue. He used to drink the gravy. He had no hesitations about taking this gravy, again, as long as it wasn't red with blood. Anyway, he wasn't afraid of this mixture of small gidim, veins of dam. Others said it that it was Rashi himself who was the one who used to eat the gravy. Amalei Mar Bara Memar L'Ravashi. Abba, again telling him about his father Amemar, Hai Chala, he used to take vinegar. The cholit means he soaked it, chada zimni, so he soaked the meat once in this vinegar. Sulo toli cholit. In other words, the vinegar only on the first round had that chemical power to remove the dam. Once you've used that vinegar once, don't take the same vinegar and recycle it, because by then it's weak. It's weak and it cannot accomplish your goal of removing the dam. The Gemara is not happy with that. Maishna mechala masmiha. Why is this different than weak vinegar? The different types of vinegar, and all are considered halachically the same. The chaltin and bay, we're allowed to soak the meat in vinegar, regular vinegar that is not so sharp. And your vinegar that was recycled should have the same status as weak vinegar. So the Gemara answers, no. Chosam, there, Isay. Here we turn to the Ayin Hey. Likire the peri biene. That the chamitzus, that element of ferment, of sharp, is it comes from the pre itself, right? Let's say they used to make sometimes vinegar out of grapes, whatever kind of vinegar they used, and therefore it still has the tama pri. That's called kiura de peri, so that even though it's weak, it still has the basic power of the original fruit from which we created this vinegar. But hacha leisa lakira de peri biene. I'll just read to you, and with this we'll end the shia for today. He says that in the case of naturally weak vinegar, the natural strength of the fruit is present. The vinegar has not released any of its inherent strength, although its taste is not as sharp, but it retains that potency to draw out the blood. The fruit to which the Gemara refers to is the wine from which the vinegar was made. So vinegar is made from wine. But here, in the case of recycled vinegar, the natural strength of the fruit is no longer present. And the meat that was previously soaked drew out the potency and the power of the vinegar, so you can't reuse it. Okay, there, Rabbi. So this is where we're going to stop for today. On the second line, on Daf Ayin Hey and Aleph, Ein Solinus HaPesach. I'll take this opportunity to wish you a great day.